Welcome to Worth Live. Hello everyone, and thank you all for joining this next episode in a special 6-part education series with our partner New Profit, where we're talking about re-architecting the future through philanthropy and social entrepreneurship. Firstly, I hope you and your loved ones are keeping well during what has and continues to be a challenging time for so many people. I'm Juliet Scott-Croxford, CEO at Worth Media, and I'm delighted to be joined by our special guest today, Felecia Lucky, President at Black Belt Community Foundation, Gerry, Executive Director at Foundation for Appalachia, Kentucky, and Nancy Van Milligen, President and CEO of Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque. Also joining us is our brilliant moderator for today, Kim Simon, Managing Partner at New Profit. Welcome everyone, how are you?
Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Glad to be here.
Great to see you all, and thank you for being here. Our intention at Worth is to create conversations that help inspire and inform and activate our community, many of whom are investors, funders, entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and leaders who want to leave a positive impact on the world and to help create a more inclusive and equal economy and society for the benefit of everyone. And we call that Worth Beyond Wealth. So we hope you enjoy this session and find it valuable and take something from today. This education series is all about breakthrough impact. Philanthropy, like other sectors, is facing a moral reckoning on racial equality, and it continues to have a vital role to play in creating an America that lives up to the promise of its founding ideals. But we must overcome the bias and barriers that have existed in philanthropy for too long if we hope to unlock the ideas and the talent and the collaborations that can drive us towards a more equitable future. In this session, we're discussing how we can use a new lens to see and invest in transformative change in rural America. It's a topic that has come up several times throughout this education series. And across the US, rural, small town, and Indigenous communities struggle to access the resources they need for their people to thrive. While these communities often look out for one another in very powerful ways, they receive a disproportionately small share of the total US philanthropy funding and vital resources for innovation, for transitioning to a new economic footing, and for bridging new forms of capital. So given the national context and including rising inequality and polarization, we are delighted to be joined by Felecia Lucky, Gerry, and Nancy Van Milligen today to discuss why it's never been more important to bridge the resource gap and engage with rural social entrepreneurs and communities that are taking on entrenched challenges. So a few housekeeping rules before we get started. Please do set your chat function to all panelists and attendees, and we really encourage questions and comments and thoughts from you who's listening today. If you have any questions for the speakers, do put them in the chat function and we'll make sure we weave them into the conversation, and we'll also create some time at the end to cover some of those comments that come through. Without further ado, I'm thrilled to introduce Kim Simon. She's managing partner at New Profit, and in her role at New Profit, Kim is helping to invent how the company supports social entrepreneurs who are tackling complex problems in holistic, systemic ways, not only scaling programs or shaping public policy, but also shifting deeper conditions like mental models and power dynamics to create sustainable, equitable progress in areas like health and well-being, economic mobility, or our democracy. So Kim, without further ado, I'm delighted to hand over to you, and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Juliet, and hello to everyone in the Worth audience and the New Profit community who's taking part today. I think Juliet set this up perfectly with attention to the way that divides emerge immediately when we start to think about what's going on in the nation today. And I think that this opportunity today is really showing how one way that New Profit is bridging some of those divides and bringing leaders and communities that are so often left out of conversations in national philanthropy and social entrepreneurship into the very center. I just want to take a brief moment to introduce myself and say how New Profit got here. As some of you who have been tuning in know, New Profit is one of the original venture philanthropy firms, started about 20 years ago, a little bit more. We have a track record of supporting great social entrepreneurs to reduce barriers to opportunity in this country. The reality is that for most of our 20 years, our work has centered on social entrepreneurs whose approaches were focused on scaling up great program innovations. This was the founding analogy of venture capital and scaling up entrepreneurs with commercial innovations transported into the social sector. And this approach turned out to be relevant and accessible largely in places with high population density and a density of philanthropic and public funding resources. So unintentionally, our approach to philanthropy in the past mostly left rural places and small towns behind, mirroring and perhaps even exacerbating those divides. So I helped start New Profit 20 years ago, and much of my work since has been on our frontier, looking across social entrepreneurship and philanthropy to see where leaders and organizations and communities are gaining traction and where things are stuck. And a sense of where things are stuck led me to co-create our Systemic Solutions Initiative, which builds on our long history of investing to change inequitable systems by focusing on leaders and models who are going at their work by means other than scaling up program innovations. And that's what you'll hear about today. If you want to know more about this work in general, I think Sam Hersteiner can plunk some of the links into the chat so you can see about the solutions, the Systemic Solutions Initiative and some of the things we've been up to in general. But let's just focus in right now on what it looks like in a rural community. So I wanted to share a couple of quick data points and then hear from our amazing lineup. Consider that 20% of the people in our nation are living in rural places. 85% of the places in this country that are considered to be living in persistent poverty are rural. 7% of our nation's foundation funding is directed to rural communities, and that includes universities and hospitals. So there's a rural philanthropic capital gap. And I would say this is not a rational adjustment related to cost of living, for example, but actually a gap driven by many converging factors that we'll explore today. And it represents a huge opportunity to be part of transformative work that has implications for all of us everywhere. So it's not giving away too much to say that we want to encourage other funders to explore what it looks like to be closing this gap. The three leaders that you're about to hear from, as you heard from Juliet's introduction, are leading from the vantage point of community foundations. I just want to say briefly that if you know something about a community foundation, you probably have in your mind an entity that was designed to funnel philanthropic resources to a local community or perhaps a region or a state. They do that, but that is not the essence of their work. And as you'll hear from them, the essence of their work is much more about building community capacity, about serving as a development hub for their regions, organizing people, helping to surface community priorities, and then figuring out how to connect up resources to go after those priorities. So just want you to sort of take the community foundation term and hold it very lightly as you hear about their work. And I want to start out by asking each of them to dissect a damaging myth about rural America, and each will take about 30 seconds to give a quick first answer to that. And then we're going to get into some stories that really bring their communities and their work alive. So Gerry, over to you first to share the myth that you most hope to puncture today.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you, Kim, and thanks to Worth. You know, the thing that bothers me the most, and particularly in this moment, if anyone's read or watched Hillbilly Elegy, is the thought that we are a monolith, that everybody in rural America is white and backwards, or everybody's a farmer, or everybody is in agriculture somehow. We are so diverse. We are so, there are so many different cultures in rural America, so many entrepreneurs in rural America, so many communities that have been thriving and can thrive. So I think just the fact that folks think that we are so much alike, you know, there's 15 definitions of rural. Every one of us is different and we can't fit in a box.
Thanks, Gerry. Nancy, over to you. What is the myth about rural communities you most want to disarm tonight?
The myth that I would disarm is that rural communities and rural organizations don't have the capacity to do professional work, to take it to scale, to accept large grants, and to really make transformational change in communities and bring around results that are commendable and should be funded.
Thanks, Nancy. And Felecia, how about you?
Mine is basically, I'm like Gerry, it's frustrating because you hear folks say that there are not leaders that exist in rural areas that you can trust in and that they're worth investing in. I want to just blow that one up.
All right, so we're blowing them up. Lack of leaders, lack of capacity, and the idea that there's a rural monolith, that there's just one kind of rural community. All right. So I always find that the best way to understand their work is to actually get into some really specific stories about what they're doing in their communities. That helps the communities come alive and just kind of blows my mind every time when I think about the implications. So I'm a fan. But let's see what you all think. I want to start off with Gerry and invite you to talk about an example from your community.
Well, you know, there are so many examples in our community, and Kim alluded earlier to the fact that we aren't just about finding big donors and trying to do their will with the philanthropy that we have. My issue is, it's not so much about the sectors that we work in. I can tell you about the work that we do in connecting all of our local farmers markets and our food systems and our farm to school and making a large system out of that, changing the ecosystem, or how we work with our local housing development organization to create affordable housing and bring resources to that in layers. We do a lot of work across sectors, but I think what I am most proud of and what folks don't see or fail to think about is the work it takes to bring together the capacity and the community members and the network to make that work happen in a rural place. So I feel like my story is not about one thing that we have done around early childhood or any of the sectors that are so important to our communities, but just the fact that we have pulled our region together to say, these are the sectors that matter to us. These are the things that we need, and these are the resources we have, and we are going to make this work. So there are a lot of, I think philanthropy and I think the federal government love to look at the program and how you get the results. I think that creating the infrastructure to attack those areas is the critical piece that we are missing. And that's the work that we bring. We bring the community building, the capacity building, and then the assets to those things. I really want to hear, I'm really anxious for Nancy and Felecia to talk about some of the work that they have done that illustrates what I'm talking about.
Nancy's back, but let's go to Felecia and give Nancy a chance to rematerialize on our Zoom screens. Felecia, talk about an example of your work in the Black Belt.
Right. I like to share, you know, especially right now, because we're right in the midst of COVID, I like to share a little bit around CARES Act funding that was made available, of course, through the federal government to the state of Alabama. And we all know that there's certain restrictions, but we were told through the federal government that they did not restrict how resources could be distributed into the communities. But the state of Alabama, as a result of systemic racism that is present in our Constitution, as well as in other areas of how our state functions, said we will make these dollars available to local municipalities and counties, but we will only make them available to them on reimbursement basis. To know the Black Belt of Alabama, which is not martial arts, it really is because of the rich Black soil, but it's also the rich Black soil that made cotton king. So really building on racism that existed through the systems of slavery, what funnels down is that many of these communities are 12 of the poorest or most economically distressed communities in the state of Alabama. So what you're saying to a community is, we will make $100,000 available to your city depending on population, but you have to expend 100,000 and then we'll pay it back. Well, if you're a poor community or if you're economically distressed, you don't have those resources to spend. So does that mean that folks there deserve to be less protected than you? No, it doesn't. So what we decided to do, because that was the situation, we shot into action to say, how can we make sure this happens? Now, while this was even more important to me, was because this is me. Like, all of what's happening, the community not being protected wasn't someone else's community not being protected. It was mine. It's my family, my daughter, my children, my nieces and nephews. And to say that we feel that folks who have more money should be able to better protect than folks who have less was not the right message we were trying to send. We got on a mission. We're a small foundation. We do not have a huge endowment. We cannot even just afford to make an investment to make that money available. But what we did, we went to philanthropy within the state of Alabama and outside the state of Alabama. We raised over $1 million, almost $2 million, to secure a line of credit so that we can make resources then available to our communities using a recoverable grants program. All of that was so important because we had about $18.5 million on the table that the state has made available to us by reimbursable grants. And all the work has to be done, has to be expended by December 30th. So one thing I found out in talking with many folks, I talked with a couple of other community foundations. They say, well, the state has now been talking about doing this work by giving these dollars to philanthropy to distribute. You know what they said to me? Well, how much does it cost you to do this work? I don't have a budget line item. I've had to repurpose and realign staff to do this work. They said, you know what? We wouldn't do it because we can't afford to do it. I wish I had the luxury of saying I can't afford to do it, but I don't. So we realign and we repurpose to make it happen. And because of this, we're now in a position where we're able to make sure the $18.5 million stays in 12 of the most economically distressed counties that exist in the state of Alabama. And for some of those counties, they've oftentimes been known as the poorest counties in the nation, for two of them. So being able to make that available has been very huge for us. But the additional piece beyond just the resources is providing the capacity. Many of the smaller communities that we serve have part-time mayors, part-time clerks, so they don't have a ready-made staff who can complete all this paperwork that goes along with all that bureaucracy. So what we've done is we've partnered with other community organizations who have been our partners from day one to make sure that that work could be done. Because at any given moment, the state could say, we're not going to reimburse you for that. So we've had to make sure, but it has become a priority to us. And oftentimes we found that folks just don't know that the resources are there. Many folks, when we connected with them, didn't even know that the state had allocated them funding. So it was very important for us to have boots on the ground to be able to make connections, because if they were just waiting on an email to get out to people in communities who don't even have access to broadband, then they never would have known. But we were grateful to be on the ground in that place and space to be able to do this work.
Thank you, Felecia. And so, I mean, I just feel both of these examples to me bring up the idea of proximate leadership, where it is really being so close to the ground that not only helps Felecia and Gerry, and as you'll hear Nancy, understand what the community needs, but also where the assets are to be deployed and how to put them together in a way that makes a difference. Nancy, let's go over to you, and I think you're going to talk about brain health and what you all have been able to do there.
Yes, Kim, and thank you. And sorry for the disappearing act. We can blame it on rural broadband, I guess.
That's exactly right.
I'm going to start with a story for context, and I apologize for it being so grim. But last year, a young man in his 20s committed suicide in our community. He hung himself in his small apartment. His dad found him around 3 a.m. and called the police. A young officer with no trauma or mental health first aid training responded. Dad, along with the young officer, were forced to wait, sitting in a small bedroom for 5 unendurable hours with the sun hanging from a noose outside the door until 8 a.m. when the medical examiner arrived. Unbearable, but it was really how the system worked. Today, I'm going to share a story of how the Community Foundation has played a catalytic role in addressing brain health in our community, and how we have created an enduring tradition in how people in our region and even our state understand and respond to brain health. The work has created many important results, including a fully embedded mobile crisis unit and narrative change work that has helped us change the mental model of people struggling with brain health issues. I'm going to try to give you a quick teaser of our brain health campaign, where we have moved first our community, then our region, and then our state to quit referring to it as mental health, that mental, that crazy is such a stigma, and to move it towards that this is a body part and the brain gets sick too, has really changed the narrative around the work and really changed the mental model. And I could do a full presentation on how just that narrative change campaign has opened so many doors, and would be happy to share it afterwards. But this work touches everyone in our community, farmers, teachers, to the way that the health profession and law enforcement handles issues that are really first and foremost brain health crises. Before we get into the story, a little bit about us. We serve 7 counties along the Mississippi River. Our population is 250,000 across 4,600 square miles. Historically, we're white, German, Irish, Protestant, Catholic, but our demographics, like the rest of the nation, are changing, and we now have a less than 12% total minority population. 7 years ago, our board adopted equity as a core value, which, to be really honest with you, was a bold move. We are a community foundation, which, as Kim spoke to earlier, leads you to think that we are accepting and delivering on donor advised fund, but our essence is really this regional capacity building and transformational change. We are proximate leaders working in the areas of academic achievement, economic opportunity, and equity and inclusion. The Aspen Institute would call us a rural development hub. In 2016, we reached out to our nonprofits and we asked them, what is keeping your families from thriving, from living healthy, happy lives? And first they lifted up poverty and equity, and we asked them to really drill down. What specific service or sector was causing their families to struggle? And the 2 top getters were mental health and childcare. The foundation conducted community listening sessions and a needs assessment. And the recommendations from the assessment were strengthen collaboration, alleviate barriers that prevent access to care, and to expand mental health advocacy efforts. And if you think about it, these are all systems issues. It's not a new psychiatrist. It's not a new building. It's really working together to remove barriers and advocate for better services. And this is work we know how to do. We convened a group of stakeholders, and at the first meeting, the sheriff stood up and he stated, I have 3 times as many people in my jail that have brain health issues and not criminals. And we are not equipped to serve them. So we asked the sheriff and we asked the police chief, what was number 1 on their wish list? And they indicated it was a mobile crisis unit. One of the things you find when you go deep into a system is how mind-boggling broken things are. And brain health and law enforcement are no exception. For instance, a person struggling with brain health lands in jail. He typically has done something that's not criminal, maybe a scene at the library throwing books and yelling, but he needs to be removed from society, often for his own or others' safety. The only option in rural America is often jail, because commitment is, the bar is too high. Once in jail, it's very hard for these individuals to get out. And what happens after they've been there for 30 days is they lose all their benefits, their Social Security, their housing, their meds, and then judges won't release them if they don't have a house to go to. And going to your family's house is considered homeless. So, I mean, it's just this cycle. When a brain health individual gets out of jail, there are no services. When a criminal gets out, there's a probation officer and they provide structure and instructions. That does not happen with someone who's in jail because of a brain health incident. So what have we done as a community foundation? Well, we did the Brain Health Now campaign, which, as I've shared before, that whole changing the mental model and the changing the narrative has been very important to our overall work. The mobile crisis unit that the sheriff and the police chief wanted, upon researching it, we found out there actually was one in Dubuque, but it was rarely used and the police and sheriff had no idea. So it was a matter of connecting the dots, connecting the people, bringing them together. It took a lot of massaging, working with the leaders, the middle management, the people on the street. And after about 2 years, this mobile crisis unit, which the way it works is when an officer answers a 911 call and he determines that assistance from a mental health worker is needed, he can call up, the mobile crisis unit comes, and a social worker arrives on the scene, and the officer can leave and go back to being a policeman. I'm going to give you a list of a number of other things that we've done because we don't have time to go through them, but truly have transformed the entire system. Now all police, EMT, first responders have had brain health first aid training. There's training for judges and attorneys, which has been very well received on how to better serve clients with brain health issues. We've got the judges where what we call the rocket docket, where they're moving these cases, they're intentional. There's an intake which never used to happen before, when someone comes in, an assessment, and they're identified as they are in there for brain health issues. It allows us all to connect them with the meds that they need. And then the judges can fast track them out before that 30 days when they've lost all benefits. So they have to start all over. There's a wraparound program when they leave now to reduce recidivism, because otherwise it's just this revolving door. There's a jail diversion program. How do we keep people from getting into jail? And we've started up a restorative justice program, which is housed at the Community Foundation for the time being, where we can incubate it and then have an exit strategy for it to function outside, but keeping those young people out of the juvenile court system and hopefully let them have a positive outcome. Let's go back quickly to our dad facing the death of his son. Today, while still tragic, it's a different story. The laws are still followed, the officers charged with the scene and the medical examiners charged with the body. But today, upon arriving at the scene, Dad would call the police. The young police officer has had mental health first aid training. He calls the mobile crisis unit, and he and the social worker head to the scene. These two trained professionals arrive, knowing how to handle the situation and how to comfort the grieving parent. The social worker attends to the dad. The officer calls the medical examiner, who is now on 24/7 and needs to arrive within 60 minutes. And the really good news part of that story is Dad has since joined the Brain Health Task Force, has become very passionate about the work and is helping us drive both the narrative change and the other work, and truly provides valuable input into the process. And I have to say, of all the work we've done, it just gives me great satisfaction on so many levels that we have managed to help so many families and also the people that work in these systems to have more successful outcomes. So thank you.
So thank you, Nancy. And I mean, I think it's just so clear that the kind of capacity building that your work has enabled in your community is mattering in ways that are going to be sustained. It's not like there's a short-term program that will benefit, X participants this year, and then funding will have to be found again. You've made enduring cultural changes, enduring behavioral changes in the way that a bunch of different actors operate in different systems in your region. And, a dot that I want to connect for all of these folks is that the capacity building work they do is not necessarily easily funded by traditional restricted dollars. So I think you could say that they each have figured out how to do it, or we wouldn't be in this conversation. And yet one thing that we often talk about together is, what would be enabled if they actually had more capital that was aligned with the essence of their missions. And so I'd like to just do one quick back around to say, with more flexible, sustained capital, what could you do that you aren't doing right now? And I just a really tight answer. I know you have a lot of thoughts on this, but what's the top one, maybe two things that you could accomplish if you had those kind of resources? We'll start with, why don't you pick it up, Nancy, since you're on a roll, and then we'll go to Felecia and then to Gerry.
Sure. So currently now all of my people that work on systems change are funded by donors and grants to truly have them embedded in my budget, to have money specifically how to recruit, how to retain, and how to really have great people. To tell them they're working on a 2-year grant is not very sustainable.
And Felecia?
Same here. That's my issue, finding dollars. And we also have a very small endowment, so we're working to build our endowment, but really having all of my folks are really on soft money through grants. So having the resources so that folks have more stability in their lives, we're really able to transform the region.
How about you, Gerry?
Well, that's really a no-brainer. That's the same thing. And, we talk about in our group water and a drought and pipes. If a tsunami of money isn't going to help my community, if we don't have the pipes to get it to the place where it needs to go and where it can be most effective. Felicia's example of the CARES Act funding, none of that, no matter how much money was available to her region, would have helped them had she not been able to step in and make it usable. Defunding the police means a whole new thing in Nancy's community because she has the capacity to work with her community and tell them what that means. Creating an ecosystem for food or a early childhood system that allows for childcare. Those are the things that don't happen in rural places because of the inequities in our geographic distribution of funding. So until we decide to invest in the right infrastructure, none of these bigger programs are going to make the difference that we need it to make.
I think this goes to the myths that you all talked about at the beginning. And, when we've started to poke around to say, why is there this rural philanthropic capital gap? Sometimes one of the answers we have heard is that, well, there's no infrastructure in place to use the money, which of course can be a chicken and an egg. But I think the two ideas that came up here related to lack of viable leadership or investable leadership and lack of capacity to do the work are really myths. And my hope is that the ways that they're myths have become a little bit clearer today. I also think that there's another thing to pick up, and that ties to conversations that have happened on some of the other of this Worth New Profit series related to equity. And, I think another myth that we've discussed at times has been the way that rural communities are pitted against urban communities of color, at least rhetorically and politically. And, I think it would be helpful to hear a couple of you just quickly reflect on how racial equity work is meaningful in your community. Brief answers, and we'll just go around. And I'm going to start with Gerry this time.
Well, racial equity work, if someone were to walk into my office and say, we're going to talk about racial equity, people would look at me like I had 6 eyes and want to know, well, what's the problem? We don't have those issues here. And of course we have those issues here, but we are not, we don't look at them that way, but we also are fully capable of hearing and seeing and understanding what's going on in the nation around us. When George Floyd was murdered and Breonna Taylor, as we all know, was in Kentucky, my community organized a Black Lives Matter march. We made the New York Times. We were right there as a community with our brothers and sisters in Louisville and in Lexington and across the nation. But we may not say things in the same terms that folks in other parts of the nation might say them, but we're feeling them. And we put those feelings into action and we just want to be able to be at the table with the rest of America and with the rest of the world.
Felecia, how about in the Black Belt?
I think it is very different for us because we have majority African American population. So oftentimes, similar to Gerry, for folks to say what's the issue, I think part of for us is the racial equity piece is really the buzzword of all the things that are happening now, but digging even deeper into systemic racism. I was speaking to someone the other day just about all of the systems that cause these things to happen. And it's true to what Gerry said earlier about pipes and the infrastructure, those systems that were created to oppress continue to oppress. And until they're dismantled, oppression will continue. So no matter how many marches, no matter how many sessions we do, so we have to find ways to get to the root and put the types of pipes in that we need to bring that water in. But we're beginning to do work to try to really change the narrative and have communities to talk and to heal. And for us, that's extremely huge, because in Selma, where so much started from the Civil War to civil rights, there's been very little truth, racial healing, or transformation that's taken place.
You know, and if I could just respond to what Felicia's saying a little bit, because we're 98% white in my region, but we are suffering with exactly, I don't want to diminish our racial inequity and issues in our nation, but people in Appalachia are suffering from an extractive economy, from the same, you know, from a lot of oppression, a lot of poverty. We, right along with the Black Belt, are the poorest counties in the nation. Our job is to help our communities see how linked our fate is with our brothers and sisters in the Black Belt. So we talk about racial equity in terms of how can we center racial equity and understand that when the nation understands that, we will be lifted up as well. And those are the complicated kinds of conversations we're having in our community, above and beyond a Black Lives Matter march, which is also very important. But I think when people read the New York Times and see that people in the center of Appalachian coal fields are marching for Black lives, that speaks to folks in the Black Belt and says, wow, these folks are not so backward, and maybe we do have something in common.
That's right.
Thanks, Nancy. I want to move pretty quickly to some calls to action for the audience. So, but I'd love for you to just talk really briefly, maybe about immigration in your community.
Sure. So we've gone all in on equity and do quite a bit of work with the CEO equity cohort, with a lot of training, with an inclusive Dubuque network. But in the Midwest, immigration is a big issue, and in some of our communities, there may not be Black people, but there would be a number of Mexican immigrants, often from the same city. We are doing an immigration needs assessment. What are the needs of these families? And just really lifting up the whole system to look at how the laws work and how they don't work, how the documented and undocumented. We have a website called All of Us. We're working with the National Immigration Forum and doing a lot of storytelling, helping people meet people. I think so often in probably all communities, but we see in our region is there are people that have never met a Guatemalan or even never met a Black person. So how do you bring people together? Because so much of this is about relationships and empathy and understanding. We've done ESL, high school equivalency, just a lot of work all the way around. And the disaster recovery with COVID, our minority populations have really suffered the worst, both economically, but also for health reasons. So again, that both of groups, race and our immigrants, that have been lifted up with that.
And I know we've talked in the past about the way that corporate employees who have come from other places have not always been as welcome as they need to be in your community. And the foundation has played a critical role in stepping in to create a context where people from all over can work and live in Dubuque in the region. Say one word about that and then we'll move on.
Yeah, in 2013, IBM moved to town with 1,300 very diverse employees, came to the leaders of the community and said, our diverse employees are not being treated well and you need to do something about it. And the foundation ended up being the organization that was willing to own that work. And rather than to start a new nonprofit and have some executive director try to solve diversity, equity, and inclusion, we've created a network. And so we bring together people from all walks of life once a month, talk about it, do racial equity profiles. We've gotten our community to disaggregate data across all sectors for the first time ever. Really, that has brought about a lot of change. Data is a storyteller in itself, and when you understand the issues, it's so much easier to tackle them.
So thanks for those. I think we have a few minutes to move to just some reflections from all of us about what we hope philanthropists will take away as a call to action. And For me, I think so much right now about what it will take to build authentic bridges in this country. And to me, that is so much about relationships and actually engaging in work together. And so the way, I see the opportunity has so much to do with the chance to invest in leaders like the three of you, to not only enable you to do more of what you do, but to learn from it and to bring communities into connection that never have been before, or have been, but only in really superficial ways. As you think about what you want to say to the audience here, what are you hoping that people will take away in terms of what they may do as philanthropists? And we have, I think, a pretty diverse array of types of philanthropists on the call. So you can think about this as broadly or narrowly as you'd like.
Well, I would say to the philanthropic world, whatever your politics, our election cycles over the last few times clearly let us know that not only do we have racial equity issues in this nation, we have geographic inequity issues in our nation. And I often hear, especially now, right after an election, about the get out the vote movements and movement building. And that's great. But I'm going to tell you that rural places like my community can only get excited about the vote so many times, because if we are not heard, if we are not seen while the administration is in office, the next time you want to get out the vote, we're not going to hear it so well. So if things aren't happening in the community that match up with what they voted for, the next time we try to get out the vote, it really isn't going to matter as much. So we need to address that geographic inequity. And often then we hear that there is a capacity problem. There aren't ways to make large grants. There aren't ways to have big impact in rural places. And I am going to suggest that the real lack of capacity is within philanthropy to get out and look for proximate leaders, not just depend on people that people that live close to rural places. Get more than 20 miles off the interstate and visit some rural places and see what's happening, because the work that's going on with me, with my colleagues here on the screen, and with 150 other small rural community foundations out there that are struggling and hanging on by a thread to do this kind of community building work. We're here. You don't get to hear us very often. You certainly don't see us. But if you will come out and see us, then you will know that we are your distribution centers for democracy in this nation. You just have to look.
Like that.
Great job, Gerry.
Very
And see,
well.
The one thing I would share is the work that we do typically, takes 2 to 3 years, and it's very hard to define when you're asking for funding as far as a budget. I'm bringing people together. We've done great work around college access, high school dropouts, the brain health, the immigrant work. And so much of it is convening. It's bringing people together. It's narrative change. It's all these pieces. And I can't say, okay, I need $20,000 for 12 meetings for this. Because it's really an evolution. It's this whole collective impact process, bringing people together, resolving issues. And what I find is we did a really good job on kids and eyeglasses. And it took us about 3 years. And now actually the program is across the state, where there's a band that goes to the schools and each kid gets an eye exam and 2 pair of glasses. Nobody wants to fund the process, the work that we did, the sausage making to get the program where now it's alive and well. But boy, everybody wants to buy those kids eyeglasses. So I think about it as trust philanthropy, and it's how we work when we fund our organizations. I can't tell you I need 27 pencils and 12 meetings and specifically this much for the new website. I need dollars to do this community building high performing communities work. I can show you great results. I can tell you how we're going to do it, but I really struggle with the line item, and this is going to happen if I spend $20,000 here.
So
Nancy, I don't want to lose
communities,
that.
your communities. Hang on one second, Gerry. I want to let Felecia in, and then we've got a little bit of time for discussion with our audience. So Felecia, well,
Right. I wanted to say, I can just say ditto to Gerry, ditto to Nancy. And I think also to add to that back to, it really kind of just dovetails on what Gerry said about being able to really trust and invest in the leaders. And that goes back to the myth we wanted to tear down. Folks invest in those that they know. So but the only way you get to know someone is to be with them, to share with them, to learn. And I think to understand their theory of change or the way their business lines look. If you are just accustomed to the way you think business lines ought to look or theories of change ought to look, you may not have the same amount of respect for the work that's going on and taking place. But I think there has to be a sharing, a reciprocal sharing of knowledge and opportunities and access and resources, because once you learn and know a person or organizations, those leaders, then you feel comfortable in investing in them. But after you get off the first 5 miles of the road, you have an opportunity to know more. And I just want to end with, so oftentimes we realize and we respect a PhD from a given university. I will be most happiest when we respect PhDs from communities as well.
so that is our charge. And I'm going to hand it back to Juliet. I think we have some time together still for some questions and discussion, and we'll end with a brief invitation myself later.
Thank you all. That was a fantastic conversation. And there's a couple of questions that have come through. What can we do for those of us that are in urban settings and in cities specifically? What can we do to help with some of these issues that are being experienced in rural areas?
Well, this is where I was with what Nancy's point that she just made. She just kind of flies by it, but it's so powerful. In rural communities, we don't have the luxury of 15 high-performing nonprofits doing excellent work in all these different sectors. We're creating high-performing communities. So if folks in cities and in the New York high-rises where the big philanthropies are, could understand and apply the same principles they're applying to their key interest in food or health or any of those things, to looking at how do we create a high-performing community that then can flourish and work on all of those issues, then we would have something to talk about. And then we could discuss outcomes. But I can't give you tremendous numbers on any sector based on a small population for a small period of time. But we can transform a community over a period of time, given the resources to put those tools into action.
Exactly. And that's our theory of change. I mean, that's how we anticipate change will happen in our communities, and knowing and understanding and respecting that, I think it really could lead to us being able to do more of it. I think there's a huge opportunity. The more folks have a chance to know and hear and see the work that's going on, like after you meet us today, I'd hate to say we think we're some fabulous ladies, but we do think that kind of, right? But it's because we have the passion with which we lead and which we do our work. So the more others can get to know us in that same light and understand how we plan to affect change or how we have affected change throughout our communities, then perhaps there's a greater chance of others partnering with us to do the work.
I think, I mean, the passion is so important, and it's so evident. And I commend you all for the examples that you're setting around leading this work. I'm interested in the response from corporations and businesses in your local areas, and to what extent are they supporting these efforts, or could they support more? And what's the relationship there?
We don't have a corporate base. I'm in the middle of the coal fields. Coal companies supported everything here for 100 years, and now they're gone. So there are many coal and energy, fossil fuel-based communities across the nation in rural places and in power plant communities that are no longer able to depend on that corporate support. And you know, I think you'll find in all rural places, there are more entrepreneurs than corporations.
Yeah.
You know, Toyota's not going to move to Chavez, Kentucky, but 500 entrepreneurs will be doing a multitude of things, and they support the work that we do. The dollars that they can contribute are not what you would get from a Coca-Cola in Atlanta or a Toyota in Georgetown.
And Juliet, I would suggest we're in kind of a unusual situation or position. So our job is to build strong communities. And a lot of what we do is build the capacity of the nonprofits in our community to do great work. And we bring them together and align the work. And when our businesses, they're more traditionally, they're going to fund the nonprofits. And we would hate to be seen as, okay, all the money now comes to the community foundation, and we encourage them to support the nonprofits and support the good work. So there is kind of a tug pull where for me to try to get the few funders, corporate funders in our specific community to fund me, that means they're not funding someone else. Usually my plea is fund more, you know, put more dollars in, be more philanthropic. So I'm really better off. It's just, it is, you can understand. It's that,
a dance.
I can see. I think there's two more questions. One, for Gerry, you mentioned, this has come from someone in the audience, you mentioned hillbilly LAE and the singular view and which it presents those in rural communities, but are you hoping that the release of the film adaptation will help draw attention to the needs of these communities?
No. First of all, I don't think it will. I think the book in and of itself sort of gave everyone an opportunity to say, oh, well, that's what's wrong with them. And there is more fear in my community, and I'm not for myself, but my entire community, there is more fear that it will just exacerbate that rural monolith, that dumb backward hillbilly. And my understanding from some of the reviews I've read so far are that it just really capitalizes on the, you know, we don't know which fork to use. We don't know, you know, we have an opioid problem. So does the rest of the nation. We have poverty, we have wealth. So no, I am not. I am more fearful than hopeful about the Netflix release. And there's a lot of anger around it. And, you know, nobody's going to invest in, you know, capacity building in a community that they see as J.D. Vance's hillbilly elegy. I wouldn't pour money into that, which is why you got to get on 2 planes and rent a car and come see me. So you can really see what's happening in our community.
And that kind of leads me to the final question for you all, which is if there's one thing you want the audience and attendees to take away from this conversation, what would it be? And how can they learn more about this subject? If there's any recommendations that you would give, obviously coming and visiting is a key one. But Felecia, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'd just like to say that there is definitely power in our rural areas. There's capacity there. There's leadership that's there. The key pieces are definitely there. And so while others have thought that it's not, it's all of what you need to do what needs to be done exists in our areas, minus the resources. You know, that's the other pieces of the infrastructure there, but we need the resources to be there to do the work. So I hope folks leave knowing that there is power in each of the regions that we talked about.
Thanks, Felecia. Gerry?
I think, you know, aside, of course, from coming to see us, there is good literature about rural places. Rural is going to be back on the map because of this election. Even AOC is saying we can't lean on the Black women forever. We've got to pull along some of these white people. So I think there is literature. I would challenge folks to really think about proximity. If the person you're listening to isn't drinking the water and sending their children to our schools, they are not proximate. So just consider your source, and then look for it. I mean, here we are on Zoom. That didn't take 2 airplanes and a rental car.
Yeah.
Consider your source, dig deeper.
Thank you. Nancy?
Certainly. So I would say one really good short piece would be Aspen Institute's Rural Development Hub. If people just want to really get their brain around what that, so you just go to Aspen Rural Development Hub, and there's a nice 4-pager that really, I think, defines the 3 of us. I think the other thing I would say is we can be a great model. I mean, we've done some work that I would put up next to much bigger communities and say, hey, this is what we did and here's how it worked, and you can do it too, because we can take a community to scale and are doing, very professional work and are worth an investment. And as we work, we start in our community and then we take it out to a region and then try to go farther. So I think we're a great model to invest in and to look at as, true professional transforming systems, because, programs are just fixing a broken system. So let's fix the system so we don't have it. And we could be a good tool for learning. So look to smaller organizations and communities and invest in us.
That's great.
If I might have to get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I wanted to add, I didn't get a chance to say what reading, and one piece I think that's really interesting to read is As the South Grows, a report that was done by the National, and even though it's focused more on the South, but so much of with Gerry's area, which is poor and predominantly white, I'm poor, predominantly Black, but we really do look very much alike, just with a few small differences. But As the South Grows is a report, I think that speaks a lot about the lack of investment from philanthropy in our areas.
Juliet,
ncrp.org.
Yes.
Kim, sorry, go on.
No problem. We at New Profit have actually convened these 3 incredible rural leaders and others and a small set of funders around with a learning community over the next several months and probably into the beginning of 2021. And we're going to be holding a summit in early 2021 to really go deeper on these exact issues. And then we are completely open to having new participants who are interested in figuring out how to crack the code on supporting this amazing work in rural communities.
Brilliant. So yeah, if you're interested in that, feel free to contact us at community@worth.com and we can put you in contact, or you can contact the New Profit team via their website online. I just want to say thanks again, Felecia, Gerry, and Nancy, for such an insightful and thought-provoking conversation. I certainly learned a lot, and it was full of some great advice and great insight. And thank you to Kim for brilliantly moderating that session, and a special thank you again to our partner New Profit, and Sam, Sarah, Lizzie, and the team for being a great partner in this series. And most importantly, thanks to all of you that tuned in today. We will be sharing the replay of this video and a lot of the topics that we've covered so far in the series on worth.com. So please do check that out. And we'll also be including that in the invite that we send out for our final session of season 1, which is next Tuesday at 3 p.m, November 24th, where we'll be joined by philanthropist Carrie Schwab and Jim McCann, who's also Worth chairman, and we'll also be back with Tulane Montgomery from New Profit as well. Also, if you're thinking about your philanthropic efforts and would like some consultation on that, please do reach out to us at community@worth.com. We can connect you with a member of the New Profit team and set that up. In the meantime, register online for all of our upcoming events on worth.com/events. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay healthy and stay safe and stay well. And we'll see you all soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.